Hi, it's Professor Monty. Today we're talking about domains of rational expressions, or if there are any restrictions on the variables. Okay, so the basic idea is we've got a rational expression, so it's going to be a fraction. And remember, we can never have zero on the bottom of a fraction. That's undefined. Anything divided by zero is always going to be undefined. So we can't divide by zero. Denominator can never be zero. So let's look at some examples. So if I look at a problem like this, and I'm just looking for any domain restrictions, trying to figure out what the domain is, I don't care about the numerator. It's irrelevant as far as that goes. I just look at the denominator. I say, okay, you know what? This x squared minus 3x, that cannot equal 0. And then I solve it just like an equation. So here I'd factor out an x minus 3. That can't be 0. So think about it. So x can't be 0. And x can't be 3, because that would make that equal to 0. And you can figure out the math, set it equal to 0. Add the 3 to both sides, you're going to get this. So those are my restrictions. If we're strictly talking about the domain, in interval notation, it'd be, okay, it's anything from negative infinity to 0, and it's also 0 to 3, and it's also 3 to infinity. So it's the whole number line. I've just taken out these two numbers. That would be the domain. Okay, over here, same thing. I've got a 5 on the top, but again, it's irrelevant. So I just look at the bottom. I say, okay, the bottom can't be equal to 0. If it's equal to 0, it's going to be undefined. We can't have that. So this time I'm going to factor x minus 6, x plus 2. Those can't be equal to 0, so x can't be 6, and x can't be negative 2. Again, those are my domain restrictions. If I write the domain, it's the number line taking those out. So in this case, I'd go negative infinity to negative 2, union negative 2 to 6, union 6 to infinity. All right, again, that'd be the domain. Those are the restrictions. Lastly, we have this one. On top, x squared minus 9, I see that's the difference of 2 squares. I can factor that, but I don't care. All I care about is the denominator. The denominator can't be 0. This time the denominator is a constant. We know 8 can't be 0, but 8's not 0. So there's no x value I can plug in that's going to make the denominator 0. It's always going to be 8 in this case. So what I say is no domain restrictions. If I was listing the domain, we would just say, oh, it's everything. It's negative infinity to infinity. Sometimes they just write it as big capital R. All real numbers will work because none of them will make the denominator 0. So that's the idea. Remember, you can't divide by 0. If you're looking at a restriction for the domain, it's anything that makes the denominator equal to 0.